Hey guys, what is up? It is Kaplan here for No Cap episode 2 of the new podcast where we get into all things Valorant with a different guest every week. And this week, I am blessed to have Shinobi here. Shinobi, former in-game leader for Cloud9 Blue, very, very smart Valorant person, formerly a professional CSGO player. And anything else you need to do to introduce yourself there, Shinobi?
No, I think you covered
I
most
covered
of
it. All right, not too hard of a task, huh? All right, yeah. What is up? How's your week been?
Pretty good, pretty good. Just enjoying the time and watching some of the matches from Masters. It's
Yeah,
been pretty good so far.
it's a weird balance to like explore a new patch and like hopefully maybe some big Valorant changes, and then suddenly you're watching this tournament that is, you know,
On the old patch,
behind in time. It's a strange feeling. I felt like the strangest experience that I've had with it so far was the Stinger meta. Like, that gets nerfed, but then you're watching people forced by Stingers, and you're like, oh man, like, I don't miss this.
the Bucky's worse.
Yeah, you
Nerf the
think so?
Bucky.
Yeah.
I hate it. I hate this Bucky meta that's happening now.
It's definitely next in line, huh? I could see it being more frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, I figured we could jump into Astra to start it out. We're going to just bounce around topics. As, the main episode's about us chatting more than any certain topic, but we talked a lot about Astra on the first episode of No Cap, and that was basically day 1 or 2 of the patch speculations, and of course, a different guest. So I guess, what are your thoughts? It's been about almost 2 weeks of Astra now. Where are you at with her, Shinobi?
I think she's she's definitely not like Yoru levels of like garbage, but
Yeah.
I personally, I mean, even when she came out, I didn't think that she was like gonna be like a mainstay. I think she's like kind of niche, and I still kind of feel that way.
Yeah.
I just think Omen gives you a lot more fluidity with how you want to play. I mean, if you're like super tactical, super structured, like I think you can make Astra work because there's definitely like cool things that you can do with like map denial and just things certain like setups that you can do. But I think having like the flexibility and the playmaking of Omen, I just think it feels better on most of the maps, and just like
Yeah, for sure.
being the person, being the guy playing it just feels a lot better, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly. You've been I'm assuming, the one playing her some in scrims.
So somewhat,
Yeah.
bouncing between her, and I play a lot of the Sentinels now as well. So
Okay, cool. Nice,
yeah,
nice. Yeah, she definitely looks, the individual playing her is a whole nother story to me. Like, it's just
yeah,
a lot to be doing while playing,
yep,
the game at the same time.
yep,
Um yeah, I'm trying to, I definitely think she's hard to implement. Like, that's a fair statement for sure, right?
yep.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's one of those things like when it works, it works, and it
Yeah.
looks like really good. But then there's so many rounds when you don't get a good use. I think the one thing that I'd say about her that I think is actually like pretty interesting that I've seen a couple teams that we practiced against that have ran it.
Mhm.
They'll do a lot of things where they'll put the stars on the ground and they'll do like the little like they cancel the star so it makes the little smoke, and they'll do like cool little plays where they'll set up op angles behind the smoke,
Yeah.
or like they'll all just like walk up.
No,
We
that's
played
kind
against
of
the team
cool.
on split, and they like did like the lurk smoke for lower, and then they canceled the star, and then all 5 of
Just
them are just
suddenly
like
all of
holding.
them are there.
Yeah,
That's
all of
pretty
them are just
funny.
holding. It's like
Okay.
stuff like that is like you can definitely catch people off guard, but I feel like those are kind of like I wouldn't say even gimmicks, but they're just like kind of one-off things, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't do that 7 times and a half and catch somebody off guard that's like half decent. They're gonna like pick up on it. You might punish them in a round, but
Yeah.
that's like really the big thing I feel it with Astra. It's like, I mean, if you can make 12 setups in a round that are all unique and you call them on the right rounds, I guess like theoretically you would get a lot of value out of
Yeah.
her. But I feel like it's hard to come up with a bunch of like those things and have them all be like, you can't rely on that as like, oh, we're gonna win every round because of these
Yeah.
setups. And it just doesn't feel as good because of that. It feels very restrictive into like what you can do, even
Yeah.
though like ironically you have the whole map that you can do stuff on. It still doesn't feel like you want to do that a lot of the time with her.
Yeah, and so I think one thing is you have to be pretty proactive, right? You have to like either have a
Yep.
plan, or I guess you could just put the stars down somewhere and not necessarily be
Yep.
using them proactively, but like you
Yep.
put them in that spot. Like, you can't
Yep.
really, you can't you can just whip out a paranoia and just chuck it.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't take
Yep.
long. It's, not as quick as a jet smoke, but
Yep.
yeah.
Maybe I was when I again I've only played her a couple scrims. But at least for me, maybe it was like a product of like trying to be like too global with her abilities, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, put a star here, 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 like put it everywhere, and try to use it. I think it's way too difficult. I think to use her in that way, to
Yeah.
like rely on people to come into certain areas and have all your stuff set up. I feel like it's a lot better to just have like one trap on a spot if you're gonna use her,
Yeah.
which I'm personally not crazy about.
Yeah, no, it seems like you gotta. My impressions of her so far are, use it like kind of cipher cages you can put down anywhere on the map and just
Yep.
decide whether. Don't get caught up in trying to be breach with her and like be
Yep.
like, oh, there's a
Yep.
guy there. Cool. Let me meditate really quick in astral form and drop
Yep.
this thing and then come out and then it's forming
Yep.
and then it's like, it's so much to
I
do.
also I don't see her really changing things. Like, okay, when you think about, okay, we'll use like bind as a basic example, right? Like the meta of like Omen playing in U-Haul and teams wanting to like bait the paranoia out, right?
Yeah.
Having Astra doesn't really change that concept. Like, okay, instead of baiting a paranoia, you're just baiting like a stuck on the ground or a
Yeah.
stun, right? It's kind of like the same thing, and I just feel like those things alone is not enough really to warrant like wanting to play her over other
Yeah.
characters. Like I think in certain scenarios, like I think she's good. Like we played against a team on Split that was running her, and they were comboing a lot of the abilities with Raze on T side to get map control. It's actually very difficult, but
Yeah.
like to deal with because you can't. The map is so small. There's like not a lot of spots you can actually like play to take, and it's hard I think to retake map control on Split
Hmm.
compared to a map like Bind, where I feel like retaking hookah or long is a lot more straightforward than like, oh, they took mail and rope. We need to retake somewhere in mid. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't
definitely.
feel as good. You want to like, obviously the obvious solution is you would push A or B, but
Yeah.
it becomes like predictable, I guess, in that sense. You have like
Yeah,
less
that's
options, I think, on
that's a
Split.
good point. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like one thing about like Astra is it when did you start playing like scrimming Valorant? Like do you know what like month you started in?
Like, honestly, probably. Ooh, I'm trying to think. I got the beta like the first, and we definitely didn't scrim. Like when ranked first came out, no one was scrimming. Everybody was
Yeah.
just like ranked was the scrims, right? Like
Yeah,
you'd
for
five stack
sure.
and play
Yeah, I
scrims
remember that
in ranked.
vividly. Yeah.
But honestly, I think I would say like right before that first tournament I played way back in like May, like the
Yeah.
rivalry bowl. It was like in April. It had to be in April at some point when I was first starting to scrim.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So,
And I feel like if Astra was super strong, she reminds me of if she was super strong and dictated the meta, that it
mhm.
might feel like my take was kind of like the Cypher Sage meta, where you have like
Yeah.
these Sage slows and these cages that
Yep.
slowed, and like
Yep.
you just have to bait them out everywhere, and
Yep.
like if you hit a sight into them, you're just like doomed. But also, if you get a post plant and still have them, it's like impossible to
Impossible.
retake.
Yep.
Like I've seen her stars hint at that because if you don't bait them out, the suck is like basically a
Yeah.
Sage slow. Like it's like a cage; it
It's
just
insane.
activates
No,
and
it's
it's
insane.
slowing you.
Yeah, it is really
Um,
good.
but
I,
that definitely seems like her strongest point to me,
yeah,
like on
I agree.
defense and on post plant, just using
I
those
agree.
to stop. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think the thing too is like to the credit of players that play the game now too. When I think back like to that time, man, we were so bad.
Yeah,
Everybody was
that's a
so
good
bad.
point.
Like someone shoots a Sova dart. Like, every ping goes off. No one's like
Yeah.
everyone's getting wall banged. Like no one knows how to like use abilities to counter drones. Like you think about like how far the game really has come when it comes to like having solutions for problems in the game. I feel like it's night and day, right? And like I wouldn't say that like, oh, if you brought like the super OP Sage or like those like slow cages back, that it would be like fine because I still think that
Yeah.
they were really strong.
Yeah.
But I think people would be a lot more creative with like how to deal with it because
Yeah.
people are a lot more comfortable, right, with like how it goes. And that's kind of how it feels with Astra. It's like, I mean, even with like Killjoy, right? Like we were talking about Killjoy a little bit before we went live, right? And it's like
Hmm.
you think about when she was first in the game, how many people would just die like 100 to
Yeah.
0 to mollies and
Yeah,
alarm
that's
bot like
true.
out of the turret. It's like once people get comfortable with stuff, it becomes a lot less like what's the word? Like it's a lot less daunting to deal with, right? You kind
Hmm.
of already know in your mind, like, okay, I'm expecting it here. We have counters. Like these are things
Yeah.
that we can do to deal with it, right? But
Yeah. That's true. And granted, like they've nerfed Killjoy throughout her time, and they did pretty quickly nerf the molly damage, but I don't think
yep,
it was by much. I mean, it
no,
was a reasonable amount, but still, I
yep,
remember the first week she came out, we scrimmed against the old Equinox team,
hmm
and they ran Sage, Cypher, and Killjoy, and like I don't know if it was gonna be good or whether it was gonna stay good or whether it was even
Yep.
good in that moment. But I just remember in that scrim, it was just the most frustrating thing. Like,
Yeah.
and I didn't. My head hurt trying to figure it out. I felt like if this is what's gonna, like, this sucks. Like, I just feel what
Dude.
is happening. Like, yeah.
It's funny because when Ascent first came out, we played this. We used to scrim a lot against Sentinels on C9,
Yeah.
and Sinatra was, oh my god, dude, pissing me off just using the Odin at B. Like he's
Oh,
like
yeah.
doing the first one doing the Odin, and like nobody knew how to counter. We're just getting stage slowed and Odin every round, and it's like it's the most frustrating thing. Like I don't want to play this anymore. Like this is so bad. But like when I think back to that now, it's like one, like it kind of falls out of meta because people think that it gets like played out, right? So then naturally like other things come into play. But
Yeah.
I also think that people just kind of know like it's something, if teams want to do it, you just respect it and then you just take it, and like there's not much they can do afterwards, right?
That's
It's kind of
true.
like, but yeah, it's crazy. Like when you think about like all of the weird like metas and like plays that have happened, even like only in less than a year, right? With
Yeah.
Valorant being out,
Yeah, and
it's kind of crazy.
it's so hard to like. I have a hard time with the fact that it's hard for me to trust what was a meta because of patches and balance and what was
Yep.
just like a meta because people decided it is, and like
Yep.
then you compare the regions and see all these different metas, and everyone's always debating these agents and whether they're what comp's good and what one
Yep.
isn't. And I mean, I do too, and I love to do it, but
Yep.
it's like it's hard because it's hard to trust my own take on an agent for a long time, because it's like obviously the meta moved more rapidly in the first few months because the game changed quicker and like people were figuring the game out. And I do think it's a pretty like deep game that obviously there's not 11 months in some major consensus, honestly, like if you compare regions. And you know, it's like how much of that is still true, or how much of the meta now is like, okay, people are better, they understand the game fundamentally more, and now this is like more of an actual meta that has to do with the game's balance. Because you know, like Jet changed a little, right? They made her smokes last longer and she could dash through trips, but like at the same time, like people just thought she sucked for like 3 months, and like her ult was at the start was better than it ever was. And I firmly believe right now, actually, that I think that ult's maybe the best ult in the game. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's definitely very good.
People took all, you know, like the most interesting one I think is the pistol meta, right? Like remember before this last classic nerf, it got to a point where everybody was like, the jumping classic is ridiculous. Like, and everybody was just buying armor and jumping around and right-clicking each other every pistol round. It was like for months, people on Twitter were just like, this sucks. But there was like 7 months of the game where the classic was as broken as ever. No patch happened. Nothing happened to the ghost, but everyone was just like using the ghost against each other. And so there was like a solid half a year where people just didn't figure out the pistol round meta. Like it's
the same thing with like the Bucky, right? When you think about it, the Bucky hasn't been changed at all. Like I mean, maybe like a small patch here and there, like maybe even a buff, right? When you think about like going way back to the beta, but like those guns have always been good, but people just didn't really like use them. Like same thing with the Stinger. Like the Stinger was always good.
Yeah,
and
it was.
It's funny because like I was like an anti-frenzy, anti-stinger guy, like back like when I was on C9, and I was like, why do you guys buy? Like I would always like Mitch, why do you buy the frenzy? This gun is garbage.
Yeah.
And then like he's like, no, trust me, it's like insane. And like because I never used it, I was like it was like me holding a squirt gun. Like I just like couldn't do anything with it. And then like played a bunch of ranked using only frenzy, and then it's like, holy shit, this gun is insane. Like once you like get the good feel, right? You really like know how to abuse the mechanics of it. It's like, wow, these guns are actually broken. But like I think that's like the main thing, right? Like people see a gun like that, especially like a lot of CS like players, like the purists, right? Like they see like, I don't want to use shotguns, like I don't want to use this, like, and it's kind of like in the game, right? So obviously you want to use it, but I think that's why like those sort of metas were slower to come around, even though they were always good. It's just because people kind of like, I don't want to use this, I'm just gonna use a ghost. Like the ghost is like more comfortable for what I know, right? Like
exactly. That's a very good point. And I mean, like, it's just so it takes a long time to like figure out if this stuff's good. And I feel like part of it is it's hard to it can be, first of all, it can be hard to trust yourself if you're the first to do it. Like I will give I wasn't the one to think of it, but I'll give my first team Code 7, which was like me and Nick and Torque and Rob Wiz and Fo, credit of like, we started, it was like April, May, and we were 5 stingering after like losing pistol. And it was like so good. But then I'm pretty sure and then I got dropped, but they kind of stopped doing it. And then like on Space Station for 6 months, we weren't like, I was well aware of what a 5 stingering as a team looks like for like a month straight in like April, May, but we didn't do it. Like, and granted, we had some insane Sheriff players, and so we bought Sheriffs a lot, but like, I'm like, why did like we were like we were like the stinger train, and then we like got off it. Like, what were we thinking?
I remember you guys played T1 in one of those early tournaments on a set, and you guys were just like running them down with stingers. And I remember you guys had some crazy hits with the stinger combo with Jet.
Yeah, it's hard to trust yourself if you're like early on to it, and I think also another thing is like, you know, I'm happy with this slightly tangential conversation because it's really interesting of like what is meta compared to what fits the comfort of your team, you know, is also a big one. And it's like it's always hard to weigh those things.
Like a fine line,
you know, I think sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go.
I think like, even, you know, to loop it back to Astra, I think that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. Like, okay, I don't think she's like Yoru levels of crap, but like she takes a lot of work, and like unless you have a team that like you have somebody that really clicks with Astra and like a team IGL and players that are like really want to play that way, then like it's so much work that like
for like little gain, right?
Yeah, if it's not naturally what you want to do anyway, and it takes a bunch of work, it's not gonna go well. And then like the only reason you'd still push yourself through that is like if you just thought Astra was going to be so objectively powerful once figured out that like you didn't have a choice. And for me right now, it's kind of hard to see it that way. I think I did see it a lot more that way last episode.
No, 100%. I mean, you can even argue maybe yours the same way. Like you really got to be like a Yoru believer and like work it into your comp. Like I think if you like really set up around it, it could be good. But then again, like it just feels better to like set up around other agents that have more flexibility than having like super rigid, like set way of wanting to play. It just feels better. But I mean, I've always been a big proponent of this. Like any comp, I think any agent can be good. It's just about like the win condition, right? Like some comps are going to be way harder to execute. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It's just that inherently it requires more execution, requires more like setup, right? More thought. But like really, when you think about it, like I mean, I think Valorant's in a good spot. I feel like every agent has a place in a comp. It's just a matter of like what you value, right? Like especially with a duel, like I've a lot of this conversation between like one duelist meta to no duelist. Everyone wants to run 2 duelists. It's like I try to not look at it in terms of like the role, right? Like the name of what the agent is, and more like what does this agent have that I want, right? Like so when I look at like Phoenix, it's like I like Phoenix a lot because I think having the flashes, it just brings it like that level of like you have playmaking and like proactive play that like it feels like something that you could do in CS. Like like they're taking map control here. I want to retake this. Like
right.
We have flashes. Like it feels good to be able to like do those sorts of things. And then like maybe with Raze, like you don't have the flashes, but you have the boom bot and the nade. You clear out those positions. It's like it gives you the same goal in the end, but it's just like achieved in a different way. And I think that's kind of that's what makes Valorant cool, though. I think. That diversity.
Yeah, and I always try to think. I think of like why does it successfully have that diversity? Like I think the fact that it takes people a long time to figure out metas is very connected to the fact that there's also seems to be a lot of diversity even when there does seem to be some definite metas. I think for the most part, the definite metas have been around weapons, not agents, and like an economy and how you manage it. And it's like for me, my theory as to why mostly is just that I think that the game is complicated enough on a team level and has so much still coming down to core gunplay and like raw firepower and comfort and all that, like very fundamental things about Counter-Strike, right? It's a game where like your confidence and energy level and comfort play a huge role in your performance because there's so much mechanics and raw gunplay, and like just the more comfortable and confident you are, the better you tend to play, as well as the fact that there's so much quick tactical team play with your teammates and comms that like, you know, these things matter a lot, whereas games that have had more definite metas with abilities have been games like League of Legends and Overwatch. And this is disclaimer, like a super subjective and biased comment from me as somebody who's not played those games competitively, but I do think they're beautiful and difficult games to play. I think the gameplay of them is more, I don't know how to explain it. It's just more baked into the game. Like it's more like the objectives and the way you play are pretty straightforward. So it's more about the comps and meta and abilities. I feel like even if you get on paper, and I've done it, I've made tier lists of objectively what agent do I think might have a more valuable kit than another one in the same slot in Valorant. It's like it doesn't end up holding a candle to like your preferences and comfort, because there's so much of winning a match in Valorant goes beyond your comp. You know, does that make sense to you?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think something that's like really like something to think about is like think about like defaulting in like CS, right? Because everybody has everything, defaulting just comes down to how good is that player at working that position, right? But in this
Yeah.
game, it's like very much like rock paper scissors, right? Like certain agents are gonna get just dumpstered by other agents, and like so you need like certain things, right? It's like I told like when I was on C9, I told my teammates like, yo, it's okay if like you're getting owned at a spot and like you can't do anything because you're like you're Cypher and they're just like triple pushing you with like 3 duelists. Like
Yeah.
we can switch the default, like we can move around. But then when you think about it, it's like all those aspects are true, but then also you can just run in there and shoot them in the face. Like you don't have
Yeah.
that luxury of like in like League of Legends, right? It's
That's
very
true.
much like confined to the abilities that that character has, and like obviously the items that you buy. It's like very much like linear in terms of like what's good versus what. Like obviously, if you're way better than somebody, you'll still win in like a league. I don't play League of Legends, but I
Yeah.
mean like in Dota, it's the same thing. If you're way better, you're gonna win. But like certain characters are just inherently like way better, and there's not a lot that you can do
Yeah.
against that. Where like in this game, it just at the end of the day, like even if you're getting owned by the abilities, if you peek them and shoot them, you're gonna win.
Yeah,
That's kind of
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And
There's like that extra dynamic.
if you peek and shoot substantially better on an agent that people
Yep.
might think is a little worse than another
Yep.
agent, it's like then it's the
Yep.
better agent. And that's just
Yep.
I've had a hard time reconciling with that backed up points, right? Because I love to think of things logically. I love, you know, games like
Absolutely.
chess and magic and poker, things that are quite straightforward and on paper, and like you know, I think it's weird because I feel like I don't want to stop talking about those things, right? I've talked about a
Yep.
hypothetical Astra meta with Dream for an hour on my last episode. It's like it's useful. And I still think it's useful to try to like analyze things that way.
Yep.
But the reality of playing in-game leading, even coaching Valorant, is like I don't know. I do think it's useful to be a nerd about this stuff and think about it.
No, for
But
sure.
like you got to be ready to just like toss it out the window when you're
Yep.
like in the game, when you're building a comp. I remember you
Yep.
talked in a interview, I can't remember who it was with, about how I think you were going into a game on Bind, right? And like Tens usually played Jet on it, and he just felt
Oh
like
yeah.
picking Reyna in the moment, and like
Yep.
you were like, yeah, why not? And I'm not trying to stir the pot here at all. I remember some
No.
like Reddit armchair people were like, you're the in-game leader, and
Yeah.
you just like
I know.
let somebody pick like a different agent than you've been scrimming, and it's like, yeah, when you're big
Yeah.
fraggers, like, hey, I kind of feel like trying this, and like I think I'm
Yep.
just gonna be more comfortable in the moment, like. Yeah,
Yep.
trust them, because that's
Yep.
that thing you're
I-
talking about, running in and just shooting them, is what it comes down to.
Yep.
If you feel like the right decision is letting your player be comfortable to do that,
I
always
think
a game
I think
plan.
another going to that. I don't want to get too much into that. The Reddit
yeah,
armchair
no,
stuff,
no
but
problem.
but to the credit though of like to me that's like underplaying like the skill of pro players. Like man, if you're playing the game as a pro and you're playing like 10 hours a day, like I'm gonna trust you if like you really feel like I'm not gonna be good on I'm gonna be better on this agent in this game because of like what I know that this team is gonna do. Of course, I'm
Yeah,
gonna trust you to do it. Like if you can only play in like whatever you practiced and like you can't adapt at all, it's like you're probably not that good at the game to begin with.
yeah,
Like I'm gonna trust my players to like make that choice. It's not like obviously game plan is important, right? But there's so many things like that game planning can only take you so far,
yeah.
right?
In
Like you
this
still have
game
to execute into
especially.
the game. You have to still execute and do your job in the game. And it's like if someone really doesn't feel like they can do that, like
Hmm.
why not play something that you're feeling comfortable? Especially
Yeah,
a guy like Tens that I know is like it's good for 20 kills no matter what he's playing. So
yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that like this game encourages and rewards creative freedom a lot, right? And I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
I don't know, you know, if you agree, but I think as an in-game leader, like enabling that and encouraging that in your players is like a
Of
big
course.
thing in this game. So,
Yep.
you know, I think letting your players have the freedom to pick things like lets them feel confident in being creative and having ideas. And it's
Yep.
like, you know, I play a role on Ghost Gaming of like our team and in-game stuff. I help with building some of
Mhm.
the strats and pistols, and I of course talk a lot with the players about what comps I think we should look at or agents to run. But like at the end of the day, my job is just like whatever you guys want to do. Like I can think a certain agent's busted, but like
Yep.
it would just be I mean, even if I was right, I don't think I ever am right against the players in the server, but let's say
Yeah.
I did, it still wouldn't be the right decision, because like
If
letting
someone can't
people
play it,
be
yeah,
comfortable and confident and like feel like they're doing their thing, it
exactly.
just works better. Like I
Oh, of
think
course.
playing to your vision and is just a requirement of that, is just being confident in whatever you're doing. Even maybe
Yep.
it is objectively a little worse, but like
Hmm.
it's what you're feeling, you're just gonna do it better, right?
Yeah. And again, I think it also just comes down to that win condition thing of like, there's so much flexibility. Like, someone really wants to play Sky, like someone really like loves playing Sky, like they
Yeah.
feel like it's gonna be so much better than playing Sova on a certain map because like it kind of fills that same role. It's like there's no reason why you can't just adjust another character
Yeah.
hypothetically, right? And like, okay, we're losing like maybe we're losing the Phoenix here on bind because we don't have like no flashes. We're getting it with Sky, so let's just run Raze and something else. Now maybe we have like no talent. You can do whatever you want, right? Maybe you want double
Yeah.
smokes. Maybe you want extra like utility, right? You want breach. Like it's
Yeah.
so much flexibility, and it's like I find it hard that like I find it hard to think that like a team can't find like a comfort zone for everybody, right? In terms of like how much diversity and things. I think the problem is that people get too stuck in that like I'm a duelist or like I'm a
Yeah, they do.
controller, and
Totally.
they don't think about like, oh, like I'm really good at like this aspect of the game. Oh, I could do that on like all of these characters, right? Like
Yeah,
it might sound
definitely.
weird. It might sound weird, but like there's no stopping like a Phoenix from being like supportive on in the server if like
Yeah.
you really use it in like that specific way for like that game, right? Like it's like, oh, that's a duelist. Like he's got to be running in and like fighting and doing all these things, but it's like the kid is so like there's so much flexibility when you
Yeah,
think
he's a
about
super supportive duelist. Yeah.
yeah, like there's a lot that you can do to alter that, and that's I think is like a big like at least for me that's like a big like way I think about the game is not
Yeah.
so much again like of the role. It's more about like the kit and that's like the nerd in me just like thinking about like oh like you can do like really cool stuff with like these sort of abilities together. But
Yeah, and rounding it out between, the rest of the agents, if you really like that agent, just making it
yep,
work. And you're talking about like a player basically just clicking with and liking a certain agent, and then
yep,
kind of, yeah, I mean, if they're like terrible compared to the counterpart agent, like at some point you have to
yep,
be like, okay, wait a
yeah,
minute, like you want to play
exactly.
Yoru instead of Jet, like I don't know, too bad, bro. Like, but like maybe
Yeah,
not, I don't know, but it's there is always weighing that, but I think like basically the player wants to play a certain way and they enjoy this agent, they're creative with it, you plug it into your comp. I feel like to loop it back to Astra for a second, like a hard part about her is you can't, I feel like it's hard for me to picture a team having an Astra player who wants to play Astra and then the whole team being like, I mean, it still is kind of how it's going to work, but the whole team being like, yeah, okay, we'll make it work, because it's like
yep,
it's like, hey, I want to play Sky Not Sova. Okay, you got some birds instead of darts. But hey, I want to play Astra. The whole
yep,
team has to be ready to be like,
yep.
okay, like we're gonna rethink the whole game plan right now, and
Because
it's
I
just
mean,
hard.
it's kind of like how Riot pitched it. She's not really like a standard controller. Like, yeah, she has smokes, but like I feel like the best part of her kit is like you said, it's like the suck and the stun, right? I feel like the smokes are like they're all
Yeah,
right, but like on Haven, it's like I don't know, man. It feels pretty bad playing Astra there when you just like, oh, we want to smoke top C. I'm just getting opped over the top. Like
that's true.
and
Yeah,
that's the thing too. Like when we talk going back to like talking about how metas like took a long time to develop, and then just people inherently getting better over time. It's like things that we thought were meta were just people were just bad, right?
yeah,
Like on Haven, it's like, dude, at the beginning of the game, everybody was playing Brimstone and no one was countering playing on top of the boxes. It took like a long time. It's
that's
so
true. Yeah,
obvious. It's such an obvious play of like, oh, I'm just gonna stand on the box at C and just peek over the smoke. But like, no one
yeah,
was like very rarely were people doing it. And
that's
now it's
really
like,
true. Yeah,
weird when you think about it. Like that's a weakness. I'm already like, oh, Astra. Like I don't want to play that on Haven because like I'm just gonna die if I want to smoke top
yeah,
C. It's like
that's a good point.
it's
Yeah,
weird like how the development goes. But
totally. Yeah, no, and I mean, when in a lot of games, I think the hero champion whatever balance and
yeah,
design shifts the meta, like the meta follows that, like, oh, okay,
yep,
these agents or whatever, the heroes are strong, now the game's going to
hmm,
play slower because they make the game play slow. And I
yep,
like, that's a lot of what I was thinking about with Astra two
hmm,
weeks ago. I was like, if this agent's really good, the game will slow down more, it'll play differently. And admittedly, like, I think if you want to play Astra and like
no,
instead of Omen, from what I've seen so far, you actually do kind of have to like like a lot of teams right now, and I think I would say the meta in NA for defense a lot is like
Mhm.
aggroing certain parts and playing like really passive and retakey on other parts,
Yep.
and like mostly just fishing to fight even though you're on defense. You're not like sitting
Mhm.
on sites like in the old days with Cypher and Sage.
Yep.
If you pick Astra, like I feel like you kind of want to do that again, and it's hard because it's not like, oh, is just Astra good enough that that's how the game plays. It's like,
Mhm.
no, like if you want to be the team that runs Astra, you have to like, it's not just a plug and play switch. You have to be switching like the whole. You're talking about win
Yep.
conditions. You have to like severely switch your game plan and
Yep.
pace and win conditions. And it's like,
Absolutely.
okay, it's hard to argue this agent is so good that it's worth doing that, because
Mhm.
that just takes a ton of work. Like that's what I mean by like,
Yep.
I feel like the first team that will attempt to make Astra look good and do good with her in a tournament is going to be a team where like the whole like every player on the team was like, Astra's so cool, let's make her work.
Yep.
And like they're all
Yep.
super into it. It's just hard to be like, have one
Mhm.
guy be like, I want to play this agent, and have everyone else be like,
Mhm.
cool, let's rebuild all our defense setups on 4
Mhm.
maps. Like,
Now, I don't
you
know how you
know,
feel about I don't know how you feel about this, like, and I don't think that this is like what Riot were thinking necessarily when they made Astra, but to me, when I saw like the Sun and the Suck, it's like I'm thinking of like, oh, this is an agent that would be like really good to counter 5-man meta, right, on T
yeah,
side of people just running it down. But then like even when I'm thinking about like when I was on C9 going like before first strike, like in that period, and obviously in the first qualifier when we were like pretty good,
yeah,
is like we were running Raze on every map because we were
yeah,
already thinking like we need a way to stop this 5-manning. Like people were 5-manning and
yeah. And the
like
nade.
Raze and the like having this util from Raze is like really strong. And like I feel like Astra is doing that, but I feel like teams are already figuring out like, and that's why I see a lot of these comps like switching up now. People are already finding out like better agents and comps to counter this like 5-man rush. Like even on Haven, right? Like for me, I hated Haven for a really long time because it just felt like, how the fuck do I stop this? Like they're rushing C
You
12
just
rounds
five
and a
man
half,
everything on
and you
Haven,
just
yeah.
can't stop it. But now it's like, oh, like people are doing like the trips on site with the cages, and like it's very much like intentionally playing retake, but knowing you're gonna fast retake the spot. It's like you
Yeah,
see that so much on, and
yeah,
now
totally.
now running Phoenix, it's like a lot of teams run Phoenix. Like you get that ult up, you always have it to retake. It's like there's always this like ebb and flow encounter of like
Hmm.
how the map's playing, and it's like I think Astra's good, and I think she helps with that. But I feel like people are already finding and being all really creative with the agents that are in the game that it's not necessary. I think to run her to counter that like 5-man run it down style. I think
Yeah,
people are getting really good at dealing with it.
that's true.
But
Yeah, and I think she's she looks rough reactively to a point where like if people start to kind of like counter things without her or counter what she's doing,
mhm.
it's just like it doesn't feel like you can keep shifting in one game with her, like
Yep,
because it just feels like she's not a reactive like
yep.
agent that can
It
be
feels
like,
it feels almost too telegraphed to a point like where it's like detrimental, right? Where it's like the I remember because I watched the first podcast you did with Dream, and it's like the threat of the stars being on the ground is like I want to respect those, but I feel like as players like get more comfortable, like I'm not gonna respect this star.
yeah,
Like I know once you know, like I think a big thing about it too, and like this is in the early stages of the game. Like it took me before I played Sova, like, I was the worst player in the entire game at, like, breaking the dart and, like, knowing how to deal with the drone, and so then, like, after I played Sova for, like, a few tournaments, it was like,
yeah,
"Oh, this is easy." Like, I know exactly, like, what I know where all the darts are gonna be on the wall because I know all the lineups for everything. It's like it's the same kind of thing with Astra, like, when you don't know how to play against it or maybe you haven't played it in ranked or anything, it's like, shit, that those stars are
yeah,
scary, but then, like, once you know, it's like, I'm just going through this, like, I don't care, like, I know it's gonna take her, like, unless she's just sitting on her astral world, like, not moving, just, like, ready to pop it, it's like, you're gonna get by, it's not that scary, like, compared to, like, the thought of, like, "Oh my god, this is, like,
yeah.
terrible, like, we're gonna get owned if we go into hookah right now because of the stars."
Exactly.
It's like
You can just pop past it. You can walk. It like
yep,
just gives you a prompt that you can like try to counterplay, and
yep,
it's just
yep,
like
exactly,
yeah, always
exactly,
it feels so strong in Valorant to be the team that's like kind of like getting to see that and
being, like,
outplay
a
it.
step
Like
ahead, right?
yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
I mean, that's how I feel like even just retakes, like the biggest thing I think that makes Valorant like I don't think I can't compare like say oh one game's harder than the other with like CS, but I think the one thing about Valorant that is like a lot more intense and I think it's a lot more like difficult to deal with is in retakes because of the ults. You got to always have like action plans in post plans. Like if you're just stagnant sitting in sight, unless it's like 4v2 and they have nothing, like
Yeah.
you can just chill and play like a textbook post plant. But like in like these crazy 5v5 retake situations where like you drop the killjoy ult, it's like all these things are like you gotta have plans at all times. It's so easy to just like lose the retake, right, or lose the round, and
Right.
that's kind of just like a big difference. And I think that's something too that it's just like the reactionary plays just makes it so much like it feels better to have something else than
Yeah.
Astra in those sense as well.
Yeah, you need
But
something flexible, right? Because the game can just so quickly become
yep,
crazy. You always have to have a plan
yep,
and be quick to react. Like I saw, I think it was Fian on Fire, the kind of ESPN, the former ESPN guy who writes
mhm,
esports. He
yep,
put up like a meme post on Twitter that was like how NA thinks about Valorant, and I think it was like the Attack on Titans, like kind of ape looking
mhm,
dudes like running or something. I can't really remember. I might be getting this wrong, but
yeah,
I remember the EU one was like a smart guy on a chessboard, and like regardless of whether that's actually an accurate comparison of NA versus EU, like
mhm,
I got thinking about like I do. Yeah, there's like definitely there's so much range in how teams approach the game. Like
yep,
obviously T1 is very like chess-like and structured and logical, generally
yep,
speaking. I would say just from watching, I'm that's just my
yep,
take. Like obviously FaZe, and they're talking about it on podcasts, are just like fuck it, like let's just do
yeah,
whatever. Like, and I think I got thinking about it. Like, yeah, like I would love to think, but I like to talk about this game like chess. But chess has
mhm.
whatever. I don't even know how many squares. I'm not a big chess player, but like I think it's 64, right?
Mhm.
And
I couldn't tell you.
yeah, and right, there's certain pieces that you can look at them and track them all and know which ways they can move. You
Yep,
can't do that in Valorant. There's
yep,
too much for your human brain.
yep.
It's you
To
can't
account
be
for.
like, well, they have 3 flashes and 2 smokes, so only these things can happen. Like Jet
Yep,
can just be like, I'm just gonna dash to this crazy spot and throw this smoke and pop
yep,
my knives, and then my teammates just gonna do this crazy thing. And like sometimes
yep,
it's like it's not like they really thought that out a ton. They just basically had like some wacky creative idea,
yep,
and like just having a really creative and crazy idea is like just good because it is. Like it's
yep,
not even, it doesn't even matter if you thought super logically about it, and it's
yep,
too hard to play the game in a way where you can like you just can't account for all those things. So I feel like
yep,
a lot of the time Valorant isn't actually about which team's the most efficient and logical and getting max value like trades. It's just like teams just doing crazy creative things in front of each other and kind of
yep.
I feel
No,
like that's kind of Astra wants would be better if this game was a little more like chess, but it's
more like chess. Yep.
she's kind of like she looks a little lost in a game where you have such agents like Raze and Jet who can just
Break timing so easily.
yeah, and
Yep.
Omen has that, right? He can TP across the map. He can pull out his paranoia. He could TP to a random corner with his normal TP. Like
Yep.
he he fits well in the like creative kind of wacky
Yep.
reactionary play, and
Yep.
I think that's kind of
I mean, really, when like you made a good point, and when I think about it, it's like you could do Astra, like you could play in a way where it's like you're accounting for those things. Like, okay, like if for instance you bind again, right? Like, oh, I think
mm,
the raise is gonna blast back into U-Haul quick on me. I'm gonna put my star not at the choke point. I'm gonna put it like in U-Haul with me. But there's so much like the thing with Astra is like there's so much reliance on like guessing like what they're gonna do or like predicting
yeah,
what they're gonna do. Where like
definitely,
if I'm Omen, I don't have to think about those things. I just do what I see. Like I make the
yeah,
best choice based on what's actually happening, not on like what I think is going to happen.
yeah,
And that's I think at the highest level, I think that's so much like good players are always going to make the right choices. And I think it's like I mean, you could I guess you could argue that for Astra then, but
yeah,
it's like the best choice is the one that you see it and you make a decision, like an informed decision, and then it's kind of like it doesn't feel as good to like make a kind of like guessworky type decision, right? It's like
yeah. That's true. That's definitely a really good point. Yeah, in the one of the like in one of the, in like one dev diary article or whatever in Astra, I saw one dev, I can't remember which one, said like we want this agent to be I just remember because I retweeted it because I was like, that sounds so cool. They're like, we want them to be like, you have a good read and you get
mhm,
like really rewarded for your read. And I love the
mhm,
idea. That's like the nerdy agent idea. Like
mhm,
hearing them say they want that to exist is cool. That sounds so fun. I love having reads in this game, and you can have really good reads sometimes. But
yep,
the problem is if you don't have a read or your read doesn't pay off, she
yep,
has nothing left that's reactionary in a game. Basically, what we're saying, it's like it's too dynamic
yep,
and wacky to try to read it. Like,
mhm,
and
yep.
it's just
I
so you
mean
can't have an agent who just hinges so hard on that.
I
It's
mean,
too hard to
if
do.
even if you have the perfect read, things can go crazy. Like
Yeah.
like, you push C on Haven, and they're you know for a fact they're going A. You're 4A. Omen gets 1 kill. I'm at C now. I got the bomb. Bomb's down. It's like you can't account for all of those like
That's true.
things to
Yeah.
happen in the round. There's like so much like, and that's like I think that's like kind of the beauty and it's like the curse of the game, right? It's just
Hmm.
like there's so many things that can happen. It's like you have to think about all those things, but then also you just gotta play the game and just
Yeah.
kind of like do what you think like you're feeling is like the right play, right? There's
Yeah.
I mean you can get into this. It's not necessarily related to the same thing, but we had this discussion a lot on C9 as well. It was like in CS, if you see a timing in an opening,
Hmm.
most 99% of the time you're just gonna take it because you're just like a guy, generic soldier, right?
Yeah.
But then when you think about it, it's like, oh shit, I'm playing Sova. I have my ult. Like pushing down mid here and flanking is like what I would do or I should do. But it's like, do I want to do that? Because I have my ult and my
Yeah.
drone and like all these things. It's like, and I told because I had this conversation with Vice a lot. I was like, man, if you see I feel like the play, the read is always gonna trump like the abilities and the character that you're playing. Like if you
That's
have
true.
the big game winning play, just make the play. Like
Yeah.
no one
Or
don't
get your
feel like you
kit.
need to be like in a certain way or like tell somebody else like, yo, go push this because there's an opening here. It's like just
Yeah.
take the timing. Like
Yeah, that's
that,
really interesting. That's a good point to put that first, especially if the team you're playing isn't thinking in that way, it becomes even
yep,
better, right? Because they're like,
yep,
yeah, I know Asova was playing front B at the start, and I know we've been making noise A, like, so yeah, like, oh, front B player might like walk into window like behind us, but I was like,
yep,
or oh, but he's Asova and he's not gonna do it, right? And then you
yep,
just get like pissed because
yep,
you're like, why is Asova with an ult lurking on me?
yep,
Like, it
yep,
it actually gets more value. That's a really good point.
yep.
I mean, we're talking about like this game just being so kind of, there's so many variables, it's so kind of creative and like and aggressive that it just doesn't feel super stiff or structured or predictable.
Hmm.
I think it's a beautiful thing, but I'm curious your thoughts. For a long time, off and on as an IGL,
Hmm.
I felt frustrated by it. I feel like there becomes more guessing. There's less. I just feel like it's harder to just win as the smarter team. Like I can't just like make the correct decision more than the other guy and just like efficiently trade out ult and value and just like
I agree.
play this like super like rock paper scissors simple game. It's
Yep,
like sometimes it just feels like it can feel like I'm not as in control of this as I want to
yep.
be as an IGL. I've felt that. I'm curious
Oh,
kind of if you have that
absolutely.
experience.
I mean, I guess the easiest comparison I can make for CS is like upsets obviously can happen. Like if one player pops off on a team, the underdog team, and they just
Hmm.
like go ham, you're gonna probably win the match. The thing though about Valorant is like that can happen, but it gets even more like snowballing and compounded because there's ults. So like think about like a game that just gets played like first round on pistol. Sova on one team just aces on pistol round and has
Yeah.
his ult on the first gun round. Like if you play that match again and the Sova just dies and then someone else gets those kills, it's like even though like yeah that guy got 5 kills and it's like they won the round, the impact for the next like 3 or 4 rounds is way different depending on like randomness of like who got the kills, like who got the orbs, like some of that stuff you can control, but like when it comes to headshotting, there's no control over who's gonna get the kills a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
You can't, and like that's what makes the game feel like where you don't have control. It's like even if you know exactly what's gonna happen, like we were really like big on C9 of like we want to always contest orbs. I felt like we were very good about like fighting for orbs and like making plans to trap and like making sure teams can't get their orbs going. But there's sometimes you just can't. You like even if you want to do that, you still can't even like account for. Well, if the guy peeks and gets the kill, he's gonna get the ult anyway. There's like so many
Yeah,
things
that's
that like
true.
it's like you can make all the right plans, but like it's so easy to get orbs and get points and get it rolling. And it's like you could just lose a game because the other team just like got the right player got the right kills and they got the right ults up. It's like there's nothing scary. Like you just saved and you're down like 5-0 and you hit tab. Fuck, the other team's got 5 ults. We have one. Like
Yeah.
it's very hard to win this round. Even if
Yeah.
like you do the right thing, you have the best setup in the world. Like they're gonna go B. They still just like quadruple ult and blow everything to win the round. It's
Yeah.
like still win the round.
Yeah,
So
that's a really good point. No, I definitely for me, one thing that saved my sanity with the game sometimes feeling like this is trying to look at it like poker of like really holding on to like okay, well, like most
yep,
of the time they're going to go here, most of the time it's going to work this way. Like
yep,
that's true in Counter-Strike too, right? You just can't be caught up in like results oriented thinking and you do need to
yep,
be like, well, sometimes it just doesn't work. But in
yep,
Valorant especially, you have to like really hold on to that cuz it's just like
exactly.
and I think, you know, another thing is we're uh Baby Bay went on, I don't know if you saw, he went on Plat Chat, and he,
Watch that. Yep.
you know, this term smeeging of like just like doing
Yeah.
something crazy,
Yeah.
like, and just fuck it YOLO basically.
Mhm.
And it's like, I know it pisses a lot of CS players off, and like it definitely is painful to watch some of the things that some players do that's like so undisciplined or aggressive. But I don't like, okay, part of the reason it's good is because it's like Jet, like you could just
Mhm.
dash away. But like
Yep.
another reason it's good is because we're talking about like, okay, Astra, it's hard for her to fit in. She looks kind of like she can't keep up in a game that's just so like crazy thing happening. If you try to play as an individual or an IGL with your decision making in too like structured of a way and think too logically, like you're just gonna end up feeling like you can't keep up. Like it's just like this is just too like it doesn't work enough of the time, and sometimes it's better to just let go of it. Like I think that was crazy for me to kind of confront, and it's a really weird thing to tell players as a coach, but like I know many coaches have been on the train lately of kind of telling their players, like, honestly, like in terms of criticizing every man advantage or like every discipline thing, like kind of forget it a little, because like it doesn't seem worth holding on to. It's really hard. It's hard to like hold your teammates or as a coach your players accountable for like, when do you want your Reyna to like be like dude, it was a 5v4, just like mathematically we had a winning round if you just backed up. But I kind of don't want people to feel like if you think that way and feel like that all the time in Valorant, it's just like you crumble, and it's really weird to find the balance there.
I mean, there's just so many things like the percentages of like winning round, like, you know, advantage situations. It's like there's way more variance in that percentage because of like the crazy abilities and the wackiness. Like if you're in a 2v1 in CS, unless you're like both on 1 HP, you're probably always going to win the round. If you play it to trade, you're always going to like win the round. Like, of course, someone can make a crazy play and win, but like playing the percentages is way more reliable in CS. But in this game, it's like you could be in a 2v1, but the Jet has like daggers and a dash, and she can just do some like crazy thing that like it's like you might be playing the perfect crossfire. It gets broken because she flies out, or Raze has rocket and just like blows you up. Like doesn't even peek you, just like knows you're there and blows you up. And then now it's a 1v1. It's like those things. It's like I think there's like fair criticism and fair like what's the word I'm looking for? Just like a fair way of being like, okay, objectively, that was like a bad thing that we did. We need to make sure we do this. But then there's also these like crazy situations where it's like, it is what it is. Like you can't do much about it. Like just let it be, right? Or like, you know, we did the perfect strat, but Sova just had they had insane utility usage, and we just got nuked. Like there's just not a lot you can do in some of those situations. You just kind of have to roll with the punches a lot of the time.
Totally, yeah. And I think in some ways I've been envious of players that have come over from games unlike CS, because I don't think they have a hard time understanding that. But it can be hard as I mean, in CS, if you're two very structured pro teams, right, and one team gets a clean like kill and backs up like 5v4, it's like pretty hard to mess it up sometimes. Like I mean, you've got 5 default generic soldiers with their util and they have 4, like and it's everything that can kind of happen. I mean, and still that's not quite true. And then there's always the argument of like, it becomes a place where you respect that the other team's going to play for the objective mathematical like right play, so you don't expect them to like say screw it and peek again. And so if they do, it actually works better because you don't expect it, so you get more caught off guard by it. But it's still not quite the winning play. And I'd agree, like, okay, you're running like Reyna and Jet in your comp and you're in a 5v4, it's still probably the most objective mathematical play to like back up. Like that probably still is the best odds. But there's crazy things their agents could do to turn the round that they can't Counterstrike. And like there's more reward to saying screw it and doing the unexpected thing and re-peeking with Jet, because you're probably, or with Reyna, maybe you're full health after the first kill, you can dismiss away, Jet can whiff and dash out. So it's like, it just makes it, those odds are more squished, I think, like, and it just makes it so it's better to just like toss out your decision making sometimes. Just go for it.
Absolutely. I think oh my god, I lost my train of thought.
No worries.
I had a good point. What was it? Fuck, it's gonna bother me.
It'll come.
It will, hopefully.
We can come back to it. It'll spontaneously appear. We can move around though. It's okay. I think we're talking about like CS and Valorant and comparing them a lot, and we both came from CS, but you came from a much higher level than me, and I'm assuming you IGL'd in CS, right? So like, what do you think the biggest like?
Oh, I just thought of it. Boom.
Nice. See,
Okay, so
I told you.
boom, there it is. Okay, so and I'm sure I imagine you've felt like this sometimes in a match in Valorant at some point. Okay, like you feel like you have like a really like you feel like you had a good read in the round, right? And you just go to a bomb site and there's just like their whole team is just stacked there,
Yeah,
and
all the
then you're
time, man.
thinking like fuck, did we do something like? And then you're thinking like, oh my god, we did something that was so obvious, like that was bad, like they read it, and then like, but there's so many things that get accounted for, like team has ult, so then they're thinking like we're just gonna play retake because we have ults here, or like maybe they had Cypher and their cam is in some spot that you didn't account for, and so like they know that like, oh my god, like they left B on a set, like I hear him on the cam, like overrotating, let's stack A. Like there's so many like weird variables that like in CS, it's like for people to make those kind of decisions, they have to do something like with their like a lot of times it's like you have to physically do something and see it to make
Yeah,
a read,
you have to
right? Where
push.
like in
Yeah,
this game, there's so many things like you can outplay, like you can bait out like Sova Dart, like so many teams, like even a lot. I don't think teams do it nearly as much now, but before like teams would recon a spot and they're just like they're out there. It's A. We're running A.
yeah.
We're going A. And like there's definitely teams that still fall into that trap,
Hmm.
and like vice versa on T side, like teams that just are so obvious where they go, you can rely on that info. But people have gotten so much better. Like people know how to counter darts. Like
Yeah,
people know how to outplay cams. Like there's all this stuff that's like that's the crazy thing about Valorant is like even if you know or you like theoretically you made like a good setup to the round and you like made a good strategy and things you did were good, there's all these things that the other team can just do and have
yeah,
that just crush that. And that was like something that took me a while to like be like like you go back and watch the VOD, I'm like beating myself up over this call in the round, and then I go back and watch the VOD, and it's like, wait, my teammates were defaulting here, and this guy had a cam, and we didn't break
yeah.
the cam. Like,
Definitely. Yeah,
it's like, well, that's why we lost the round.
yeah.
Like,
And it's so hard to control for all those. And I
yep,
think like a big part, I think like a big skill for pro players in Valorant, especially IGLs, is just like being okay with it not working out and kind of being
yep,
okay, yeah, you can always do things better, but like being a perfectionist in this game seems much more self-destructive than being a
it
perfectionist in
is.
Counter
Oh,
Strike because it's like
absolutely.
you couldn't have accounted. Like, yeah, man, you could have told your default guy, maybe you tell him look for the cam a little more next time, but like next time it's gonna be a drone or there's gonna be some new agent with some other thing. Maybe they did a wolf or did a sky flash. It's like
Yep,
maybe they're maybe they just have a ton of alts that are insane
yep.
at retaking, so they just decided to like pick a site and stack it.
Yep.
Like, and there's just you can't
I have a
beat yourself up too hard.
actually
Yeah.
I have an interesting question, especially because you were in IGL and now you're coaching a team. How much value do you place in counter stratting or like preparing for a team specifically versus like preparing your own game? Because I feel like there's like advantages to countering in this game because you kind of like see what a team's gonna do, and there's very like within the confines of a comp that you're playing, it's more rigid, I think, in like the broad depth of strategy that you can play based on
Yeah.
like the agents that you're running. But at the same time, it's like there's so much like we've talked about, there's so much like crazy stuff that people can do, and there's like obviously because you're blind picking in the current state of the game, there's nothing stopping a team from just like changing what they want to do last minute. Like they probably won't, but
Yeah.
like to me, it's like I feel like having a really good game plan. Maybe like you have like a few ideas of like their tendencies or something, but
Hmm.
I feel like it feels objectively better a lot of the time to just like have a really good sense of how you want to play the game
Yeah.
because you can't account for all this like crazy shit that happens in Valorant. But
Yeah.
that's just my opinion, at least. I don't know how you feel
No,
about that.
I agree. Like I feel like as a IGL in this game, I was so focused on counter stratting in the
Mhm.
server. Like
Yep.
it feels like this game on attack is a lot about like reading the team's comp and their setups on
Yep.
defense and being like, okay, these are the holes. Like,
Yep.
so I do feel like, and again, I don't have a good comparison because I IGL'd Counter Strike, but I IGL'd on like main teams. It wasn't like
Mhm.
high level stuff, but it does feel more like in Valorant, I'm spending so much more of my time in the server in game thinking about what the enemy team's doing and trying to outplay it.
100%.
But
100%.
in the preparation beforehand, it doesn't feel that useful because it's like there were patch notes between tournaments. They
Mhm.
shifted players. They tried different roles. They're trying a new comp.
Yep.
Even if they're not doing any of that, they still have different setups. And it's
Yep.
like it just feels like you can't really like
Yep.
counter
I think
strat that stuff too hard. Yeah.
the one experience I'd say where counter stratting really paid. I mean, in the end, it didn't pay off because we didn't qualify for first strike. But but
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, we played 100 Thieves in the like in one of the qualifiers for the NSG, like I think in the group stage of the closed,
Yeah.
and they were owning everybody on blind. And so me and our coach, we did like we watched like 3 of their games and we prepared, and it was like in that match, that might have been the most rewarding game I've ever played in terms of like as an IGL because it was like I saw like a turret or I heard a turret in one spot. I was like,
Yeah.
boom, they're doing this and this. Like,
Yeah.
look. I'm like, listen, they have the ult on Killjoy. It's like we're gonna bait it out. We're going A. We're gonna tap the bomb. He's gonna ult. We're gonna TP. We're coming back A. I knew the whole round how it was gonna play before anything happened. Like before the round
Yeah.
started, it was like that was the most rewarding like feeling for me as
Yeah.
an in-game leader. But then it's like honestly, it's like if I didn't have any inclination to that like prior, it probably would have been. And this kind of goes against how I feel in general, but it would have been very hard. I feel like a lot of the time to like pick up on like every tendency or every like, oh, I know that this is set up. That's why I think it's like you said, trying to counter in the game is very important, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like you something you need to make good reactions in the moment. You can't just always account for like every setup and every piece of
Yeah.
utility. But
Totally.
at the same time too, it's like unlike CS, I feel like you need players that can do this as well on like the individual level. Like
Mhm.
if they're defaulting a position, understanding like Cypher and Sova are here, how do I like your win condition of taking the site is so much different than if you're playing against like a Phoenix
Yeah.
and something else. It's like and players need to be able to identify that on their own and like
Totally.
make those decisions. And that's like one thing that I think like playing with a bunch of CS guys on C9, it was actually something that was like difficult for us, which you think wouldn't be because we had a lot of experience and it was like like we should know how to like play these situations. But there was a lot of times where we would just like we default into a spot and like we didn't know like how we wanted to like deal with the agents that are at the site
Totally.
because we're just like we're thinking too much about like how we want to end the round, not really like oh like they're cyber heroes, just fucking walk out on them and kill them. And like eventually we got to
Yeah.
that point where we felt that, but it took a long time of like knowing how to counter agent specifics, right?
Yeah.
Because at CS, it's like the counter is always just going to be like, oh, the guy's playing in this way, in this spot. There's like a more black and white counter, I feel like, to like what they want to
Totally.
do. But
Yeah.
there's a lot more gray in this game because of the combos.
And yeah, and it makes it so hard as a team mid game. Like, yeah, you need like smart players. Micromanaging that as an IGL is just like,
Yep.
and we should get into that a little later, but that's just not a thing. Like,
Yep.
and yeah, I remember like the first week of scrimming this game in April, and me being like, I remember very immediately. I think for anyone, it wouldn't take long to feel like, whoa, like you have to change spots a bunch on defense. Like
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
no reason you'd ever do that on Counter Strike, pretty much,
Yep.
unless you're Opper. Like that's it.
Yep.
Otherwise, like
Yep.
it's pretty possible to argue like, well, we have a certain player that's comfortable in a certain situations happening, therefore we should like switch your spots. Like your spot
Yep.
always trumped it, but in this game, it's like everyone's a rotate. Everyone's not a rotator, but
Yep.
everyone needs to switch.
You have to
Like
be a master of positions, right? Everywhere.
yeah,
It's more like this game is way more master, obviously inherently because there's agents. It's way more mastery of self, right? Like knowing like the parameters of the character I'm playing and like what I can do, like limits
yeah,
that I can get away with in these positions. Where like in CS, it's very much like becoming a master of the position, not a master of like. I mean, obviously, there's nothing inherently to master as like a player, right? Like you don't gun skill, right? That's it,
yeah,
really, right?
exactly.
Knowing nades, but that was also something for sure. Like in the beta, was like playing like we'd play like a few setups, and it was like we have to change, we have to be more dynamic, and
Yeah,
like that was a big focal point on C9 in the beginning. Was like trying to be always moving spots around, and like it was tough too because played a bunch of different roles as an IGL. Like I started off playing Sage, and then I played Sova for a long time, and then I was playing like a Sentinel for a little bit, and then I went controller. That was like what I played the most on Cloud9. But it was tough because like for as an IGL, you kind of know you're 2 steps ahead most of the time, right? Like in terms of like how you
hmm,
want to set up the round. So it's very like if I'm playing a Sentinel, it's very easy for me to like go and set up my stuff, and I don't have to like explain how I want it. But
hmm,
then like for someone that's playing it, it's like if they're not thinking about that as well, they're probably just going to fall into comfortability of like I'm going to just go here and just play my A setup. I'm just going to go here and
yeah,
play my B setup because it's like there's so much stuff. It's like overwhelming for and like I don't blame players for falling into that. It's just like in this game, if you want to be like really, really good, I feel like you have to be able to do that a little bit of like
definitely.
I'm the cipher, like, but I'm not just like an A or B player. I'm like I'm an everything, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm and you need teammates have to communicate way more about like what's happening at this spot, like how they're defaulting here, what abilities they're using, like
Oh
because
yeah.
there's way more counterplay in like oh they're sending raisins over here, like let's just bring our raise here. Like
Yeah.
you can't just throw a cipher at like a raise and a omen and think they're gonna just like do anything there. They're just gonna get mowed down most of
Yeah.
the time. So
Yeah, no, totally. And you need, as IGL, you need players, right? Who, yeah, are like can do all these things. Are really smart because, like you're saying, there's so much more communicating that stuff that if you
yep,
don't have players who are individually at least step one communicating it, and B
yep,
kind of thinking about a layer ahead of that, like
yep,
it's just so hard. You'd have to have it's unrealistic to have that level of all-seeing eye as an IGL. Like you
yep,
don't know the intricacies of what's going on the other site, and like you can't think about it. Like,
yep.
and it's yeah, no, it's really hard. I am a firm believer. I'm curious your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the freeze time is too short in this game, and nobody
So,
likes to hear it. But
well, I think the weirdest thing is why is the pistol round 40-second freeze time and then every other round is 30? Like,
yeah,
am I like why? I don't
I don't
understand that.
know.
Like, why is the like? I feel like if anything, the pistol round should be 30 and the every
There's
other round
less
should be 40.
adaptation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It's I agree with you though. I think the hardest thing about the freeze time is like I mean it's very easy when you're just playing a character that doesn't have to do anything. But like I've been playing a Sentinel lately. It's like holy shit, it's a pain in the ass. Like sometimes it's
yeah,
like I got without like I don't want to use no clip and scrims, but like sometimes when you're learning a setup or you're doing it, it's like man, I have to ghost. I have to ghost over here and like put my charts. I'm just never gonna get this shit down like in time. It's just like
yeah,
and I think that honestly that's probably why a lot of Sentinel players fall into playing like one spot.
yeah,
Like in an ideal world as like an IGL nerd, it's like, man, I want like cages here, trip here, camera over here. But it's like, man, it's fucking hard to like set all that up.
yeah.
Especially if you're not the guy calling to do that stuff. Like if you're just a player that's being told what to do, if
Hmm.
I'm already running B, like I can't just come A and like put all this stuff here. It's like very hard.
Yeah.
And before I played Sentinels, because I was just playing controller on C9, it was like I didn't get it as much. It was kind of like, well, like why can't you just set up this stuff here? Like I'm telling you to do it. It's like even 3 seconds in, sometimes it's
Yeah,
hard. Like
like
sometimes I don't
combined,
make it. But
especially or
yep,
split, like
yep,
tripping vents and then going B. I mean, like
yep,
you got to
yep.
tell yourself to do that
Uh,
like in 2 seconds. Yeah,
yeah, like as soon as the first other round is over, you're defusing the bomb. It's like, all right, I need you to go here and here this round,
yeah.
like in the following round. Yeah, it's crazy.
And how are you gonna? If the information that informs you to run that setup needs to come from another player, how are you even gonna have time? But
Yeah,
I mean, I'm glad you said it because I was gonna go there. Of like, it gets to a. I think the freeze time is feels too short enough of the time in pro games, and I mean like you're a pro IGL and I was,
yep,
and we're both saying it. Like I think we probably have some valid insight there of if
yep,
we feel like the freeze time's too short, maybe it is. Like, and it feels like what happens is there are rounds where you were just saying like you just go to your comfort spot because it's like too hard to do the right thing.
yep,
Like you just don't have the time or the comms, and it's like
yep.
so you just end up saying fuck it. And to me, that's not good because you're making the
Kind of
strategic
gambling
depth
around.
more shallow than it
Yep.
could be for the game. And don't you want
And
the game to be as incredible as it can?
especially in a game that's shorter than CS, 12 rounds,
Yeah.
and like that's the thing though. There's been so many rounds in a game where someone has a crazy round and like you're excited, but it's like curbing the excitement, and then also being like, fuck, I gotta hit tab and see like, all right, they got
Yeah.
6 out of 7 here, 5 out of 7 here. Like they're probably gonna do this. Like we need to set up like this, and then like someone's already running to like their normal position or whatever.
Hmm.
It's like it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
definitely a lot. Like
And I think it makes it so you end up just not like the
yep,
type of counter-stratting and adapting you do in a tactical pause. You just don't. Of course, you're always going to do more of that with a tactical pause
yep,
than without in any game like Counter-Strike or Valorant.
yep,
But I think the gap between how a 30-second freeze time round and the one where you pause, like it's too big of a gap. I don't know.
yep.
Personally, I think like this game's
I
really
agree.
strategically complicated, right? Wouldn't
No,
it be
for sure.
cool if the games play more back and forth adapting? Like, don't we want to just like pull the curtain back and show that more? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I think I mean it's unfortunate. I think a little bit of Riot's like thought process though, and I mean this is why like the abilities are so over the top. Is like they want that crazy like that screaming
yeah,
commentary where someone's like, and he pulls out the razor and he gets raised like all this
yeah.
crazy shit. And it's like if you slow the game down too much, you kind of lose a little bit of that like hectic like
That's true.
amped up like gameplay. And
Hmm.
I mean
That's a good
it
point.
is what it is. Like I don't think 30 seconds is like so short that it's this is unbelievable. It's not like a big point of complaint, but even 5 seconds, I feel it
Would
would go
help.
a long
Yeah.
way. Yeah, it would help for sure. It'd feel a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely get what you're saying too. If they like that kind of swingy and wacky nature of it, but at the same time, I think there's so much more to unpack in rounds that like they could, I think as the talent pool gets
Yep.
better working events, they could get more out of that long freeze time too. Like
Oh,
caster for sure. I'm
absolutely.
sure casters at this point, plenty of them would agree. Like there's probably so much to talk about that they feel like
Oh,
they
of
can't get
course.
to in that freeze
Yep.
time. Like it's the same problem as the players of like we
Mhm.
can't really talk about what they're doing quick enough to actually have our setup. Like, and for the casters, game starts too quick.
Yep. There's a lot of like almost multitasking to a point where you're kind of like you're talking about the setup while also like doing the setup, right? People are kind of moving around and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's very yeah. There's a lot.
What do you think of as an IGL? What do you think of the straightforward rule set in CS? Right, is coaches don't talk except in pauses because
Mhm.
basically there wasn't. I don't know the history probably as well as you or most people. There wasn't really a rule on that at first, and the coaches were just
Yep.
IGLing. Like, do you have any thoughts on that in Valorant? Like, should a coach be able to talk all the time,
So
every freeze time, just pauses?
So I definitely don't think the coach should be able to just talk all the time because I think having I mean I'm biased because I'm an IGL, but I think having an actual leader in the game is important and
Yeah,
like
I
having
agree.
not just having a coach that's just like especially in this game when it's like so like overview esque in the sense of like your the setups are like abilities you're putting up. It's like I feel like it's too much of an advantage if I'm a coach and I'm just sitting back
Like playing
like
StarCraft, yeah,
watching everybody. Yeah, it's kind of like you're playing an RTS almost. It's like I think having that element of being in the server as a caller is really important. But I don't think coaches should be like unable to talk at all. Like I definitely think in pauses they should be able to talk.
yeah,
Um, it's hard. Obviously, online era, it's hard to regulate any
regulate,
of this
yeah,
stuff. Like you can just do
that's
talk whenever. But um, yeah, I think online. I mean, I don't remember exactly if this is how it was, but I think at First Strike when they did the land for Korea, it was like the coaches were not allowed in the playing
yeah,
area at all. So
yeah,
it's like, and that's more like MOBA style. Like in Dota, I know the coaches like when they're at events, they don't go in the booth. They're only there for the drafting phase, and then after the draft, they're
yeah.
not involved in the game. And it's like I don't think it needs to be to that extent because
Hmm.
I think in those games, I think the game is like won or lost a lot of the time in the draft and the preparation.
Yeah,
This game is, I think, it's way more about like how you execute in the game, and I think having a coach that can talk at least in a attack pause or
hmm,
in halftime would be really good.
yeah,
But that's about it. I think.
yeah.
I'd be comfortable with that. I think that'd be fair.
You think keep them out of freeze time though?
Yeah, I don't think they should
Yeah.
talk in freeze time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I've played with that thought, but my initial response is definitely that shouldn't happen. But I definitely think, yeah, pauses for sure, right? And
I mean, I would be comfortable giving more I feel like one pause because I think a
yeah,
lot of the
one
time right
30
now in
second
BC,
pause.
it's not enough. I feel like you need like at least two. I mean,
Yeah.
I think three would be okay. A lot of teams don't even use the pause, and like
Yeah.
that's like it's egregious. I think not to use the pause. They take use of them, but I think like having the pauses, and that honestly might be why a lot of teams don't take pauses because they're like scared to like burn their only pause of the half too early, right? It's
Yeah.
like I think if someone was like, "Yo, you could have three pauses per half," I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of teams would start using them because it's like, okay, we don't feel like especially as a player, I'm sure you felt this. Like you don't want to feel like you don't have control a lot of the time. Like you don't want to just be like 4 rounds in, like fuck, like this game's over. We need to take a pause. Like you
Yeah.
want to kind of like
Totally.
have pull it together, like be like, no, we still got this, guys. Like have good energy, even if like
Hmm.
even in your mind you're thinking like the game's kind of slipping a little bit. You don't want to like give that like allure that you're like the game's done. Like
Yeah.
we got to pause right now. But that's like the thing is like sometimes it's too late. Like 7-1, you're taking a pause. It's like
Yeah. And I mean, you get one tack pause a game right now,
yeah,
30
yeah,
seconds. And
it's
what in
rough.
CS, it's two per half, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
believe
I
it's rough.
think even as people get shocked when I say it, but I think even three per half in Valorant is okay. Like, if otherwise these freeze times are short, like the game has more adapting and
Yep.
complexity than CS. And
Well, I mean, you could argue every round is way more important too because of the shortness. Or
yeah,
like you would think having the extra
all
the pause
economy and
is even more important because there's like less opportunity to make things go your way, right?
totally,
Like,
yeah. And there's just so much more to think about, right? As an IGL, having that coach being there watching it, and that second opinion is super valuable. And
yep.
it comes back to again, like revealing the strategic depth of the game for me. Like, well, first of all, a quick side thing. I like having coaches in the background on CS because I like seeing
Mhm.
the guy shake their shoulders
Yep.
and fist bump. I think it's just a
Yep.
nice thing to have that doesn't
Yeah,
hurt the game.
for sure.
But
Yep.
yeah, like the thought of Valorant's strategic depth and complexity with a round by round format, like, going into a place where, like, yeah, the coach is just gone for the whole game. Like,
Yep.
I feel like you're just not letting the game be as strategically interesting as it
I
could
agree.
be, and
I agree.
that's tough for sure.
I mean, there still hasn't been a coaching slab. We're 11 months into the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm waiting still every day, but they said it's on the way.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we'll take a quick break here. This seems like a good break point, and then we'll probably come back, talk a little more about IGLing and wherever the conversation takes us. And yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we will see you guys in a bit. All right, we are back here. It's Kaplan and Shinobi. Had a nice little break. Ended up talking plenty during the break about plenty of interesting things. It's how it goes. But, I think we're going to jump into talking a little bit more about what goes into kind of IGLing in Valorant and some things we might as well shine some light on in terms of what goes into it, especially on kind of coming up as an IGL. I guess to start, this is a question I just see constantly asked on Twitter, on certain YouTube interviews and so on. Is there really, what are your thoughts, Shinobi, really a best IGL agent? Do you think there's certain agents? What are your thoughts on agents and IGLing?
I mean, I think, we talked a lot about comfortability, right, for players. And I think it goes the same for a caller. Like, whatever the caller is most comfortable on, obviously it's like a kind of a cop-out answer. But I think that is really important. But I think, like, in terms of, like, just straightforward, like, maximizing like what your kind of job is. I always felt most comfortable on a controller.
Yeah.
At least on attack, because on attack it's like if I need a smoke in a certain spot or I need something to be done, I don't have to wait for someone to see it or for me to be like, yo, I need you to smoke this. It was just like I'm doing it. Like we're going here and like there's certain things that like IGLs might like pick up on something or like they have a certain like a not normal like we went to the server and talked about like this is the smoke that we're gonna do. Like there's just like alterations or like little like on the fly decision making you're gonna make that like maybe like a player playing it wouldn't account for necessarily. But lately I've been playing Sentinels, and I think in a team that's like good communication and like your controller is like vocal and very like active in what they're doing. I think Sentinel is definitely like it feels good to call on because a lot of the setup work on CT side is alleviated because I don't have to like tell somebody or you don't have to you don't have to go in a server and like be like these are your setups and like hope that they kind of like can adapt beyond the setups.
Right.
It's like very much like, oh, I see like something specific here. Like I'm just gonna go do it. I don't need to like get the Sentinel player out of his groove of like whatever he was gonna do and be like, yo, actually, like, can you run from A to C and put a trip here for me? Like, I need this. Like, I just go and do it. It's like that. I think is like Sentinel feels really good for that sense. Doesn't necessarily fit into. I don't play the traditional like when you think about like the IGL Sentinel, like people are just like hard lurking, baiting, like playing like away from the team. I'm not really. I've always thought of like Sentinels like being very good in like the pack, using utility to clear positions. Like obviously, if I need to, I'm lurking. I'm doing it like I'm versatile in that regard. But I feel like there's a lot of value out of like using the camera, using the turret, like taking map control with these sorts of things. And I think that it's equally as good. And so
yeah, that makes sense. Like a lot of it is about like as an IGL outside of what you're playing, what utility do you end up kind of having to micromanage the most? And like, can you kind of, even with really smart and talking to players, you're just going to end up doing it? And like, I definitely can see how a lot of IGLs end up playing Omen because like, there's not really a world where your smoker is like gonna just be super creative and loose or like on the same page so much with you that like they're just doing the right, like you end up having to micromanage the smokes, being like, hey, when's your smoke up? Okay, you have to put your smoke here. Hey, smoke here. And I mean, luckily, I think for a lot of IGLs, they go to smoke agents because of that, right? Like, because it just seems like the no-brainer. But I see what you're saying is a really good point, especially on defense IGLing. Like, the Sentinel is the one you have to micromanage the most, and it's so much more than micromanaging like 2 Omen smokes. It's like that's a really good point. That like it's the king like defense IGL agent.
And the thing too is like when I first started playing, I was playing Sage and then I played Sova for like a good like few stretch of tournaments in the summer. And I see a lot of people think like, oh, like Sova's like the ultimate info agent. Like, why wouldn't you want to IGL on Sova? And I feel like Sova is so straightforward and what he does. It's like very easy to just be like, here's like the 3 darts you need over the site. Shoot them when we're executing, right? Or like, yo, we need to re-clear this area. Just drone this for me. Like, it's very easy. It's like that stuff is so easy to manage versus like a bunch of trips and like all this like smokes. Smokes are obviously super important because you're setting up fakes. You're layering out the round. Like there's certain things that you need to be done. The drone is like the most. I feel like that's the most simple character to tell someone to do. Versus like other characters. And then like for duelists, like I don't play. I mean, I play them in like ranked and things like this, but I feel like playing a duelist would be difficult to call on only because I think there's like all of these things you'd have to manage while also being like an entry fragger a lot of the
Yeah, it would
time
be
and like
really
fighting.
hard.
It feels very difficult. I mean, if you have the right team, like I mean, Shazam does it with Jet, but I
Hmm.
also feel like their team is pretty loose. I mean, again, I don't know the exact structure of the team, but it's pretty
Yeah,
loose. And I know the from playing with those guys in CS, like a lot of them, like Sick and Dapper, they're very vocal and like they will control a lot and contribute a lot in like the mid round of things they're gonna do. It's a lot easier, I think, to play a
yeah,
Jet in that type of team environment in like versus another team environment where people maybe are more like reliant on being microed. I
yeah.
mean, granted, there's a reason why Sentinels have been consistently one of the best teams because they have that element. But
Yeah, that's a good point. No,
yep,
it definitely does depend on like the how talkative your team is, how creative and kind of loose the
yep,
IGLing really is. Like, what is IGLing, and that
yep,
varies a lot. And yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. Like, duelists, you would have to manage so much if you're an IGL microing even a moderate amount, and
yep,
kind of controller and sentinel are the ones where it makes the most sense. And I definitely agree with you, Sova. Like, even if you have to micro something, it's not usually tight timing of like, hey,
yep,
like we got to run this area. Okay, you walk over there, right? With smokes, microing smokes, you sometimes miss out on some important tight timings with the
yep,
smokes, and like it's just easier to the smoke, and when your smoke's back up on Omen dictates a lot of a round. Like,
yep,
it's hard to kind of constantly ask, hey, when's your smoke up?
yep.
um and I think like one thing I sort of IGL, but one thing I could see going better about someone else doing it is, to be honest, at least when I was IGLing, it was a lot of microing. The reality is I'm not as focused on fragging, and my fragging power is
Yep,
worse. Regardless of how I am as a player, like 100% I frag harder when I'm not
absolutely.
IGLing. It's just a fact. And Sova isn't a duelist, but like when you do have a Sova getting, just big fragging games, like look at
Yep,
Crashies, like it's a big agent to do it on because that ult is such a big ult that like
yep,
your Sova having a hot game, he can't really make plays super hard to carry, but if he's winning his gunfights, having like five Sova ults in a game is just
oh,
like a
huge. Yep,
huge part of
yep,
winning a game. And when you have just a monster player on Sova,
yep. I mean, I think
it
outside of all
helps.
that stuff too, though, again, player comfortability. If you're an
Yeah,
IGL and you just feel great, like I love playing. You love playing Sova. You're like a Sova guy. Like play Sova. Like it
yeah,
doesn't. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, comfortability is going to win you games more than like optimal, like
totally. Yeah, that's a
what
good
makes
point.
the most sense, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah. Yeah,
so,
no, that always takes number one for sure when you have to be thinking about so much else, whatever
yep,
agent's most intuitive
yep,
and doesn't,
yep.
stress you
Because
out.
Dazzle calls for you guys, right?
Yeah, he
And
does. Yeah.
yeah, so I
And
mean,
he plays
again,
Sova.
yep. So it's again, it's like whatever works for the team, right? Like so that's also a part of IGLing, not related to the rules, but sometimes you just got to sacrifice, right? Like you're going to be the guy that's going to take the shit that nobody wants a lot of the time, right? That's
Yeah,
kind of like
exactly.
the role player. It's like the not so luxurious part, but it's a
Yeah,
necessary thing to be done,
definitely.
right? Someone's
Yeah.
got to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, you totally can frag as an IGL. It
Oh, of
depends on the
course. Yep.
team and the type of player you are, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think kind of, talking about that, I think, what are your thoughts on, you're calling on an unsigned team right now, right? You still playing with the guys that you played with in the last qualifier?
Actually, playing with I can't really talk too much
Yeah,
about
it's
the
okay.
team I'm playing with, but hopefully something soon that I can announce and say
Okay.
that would be, yeah. But I am playing on an unsigned team currently, correct?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious what your thoughts are on. Of course, you've got connections, a lot of experience. You're
Mhm.
coming over from Counter Strike, but still, there's something to be said about IGLing an unsigned team. I think compared to
Mhm.
being IGLing on a signed team, and especially for players who might not have the connections and
Absolutely.
experience of
Yep.
being a professional Counter Strike player. What are your kind of thoughts on? I think most of the casual audience isn't super tuned in to
Mhm.
how different the role is
Mhm.
depending on your team and kind of what support you have from staff. What are
Mhm.
your, do you have any comments on that? Kind of how it feels different IGLing on Cloud9 compared to an unsigned
So
squad?
So for okay, so one thing is like as a caller, at least in CS, maybe this was because I never really had like a good coach in CS like ever in my career. I basically was like the coach while also being the caller. So it was something like on C9, that was the first time I ever had like a lot of staff that was like really like hands on. Um, Obviously certain aspects, great. Like setting like scheduling and like just like not having to be like the guy that's like doing vetoes and like we're doing all this stuff, like not setting up the schedule. That's like extra shit that like I don't want to do that I have to
Mhm.
do now on like an unsigned team because I don't have like a manager or anything. But there's like certain things like just like I like to watch the games and make a game plan and stuff. And like sometimes it's like, when you have a coach, like, oh, they can do it, but I'm still gonna do it anyway. So nothing really
Yeah.
changes for me personally when it comes to that. I'm a nerd. Like I like doing the prep work and like watching the games and I
Yeah, I
just like
get that.
watching Valorant. But yeah, I think I think the thing with being like unsigned versus being in a team is just again like there's no structure, there's no support system, so everything's gonna have to come organically and like come from the team itself, right? Like if
Yeah.
you wanna improve, everyone's got to be equally contributing, right? There's no one
Mhm.
there that's like can be like, hey guys, like practice is then like we're gonna watch like this is the thing like with James like when he was our coach it'd be like he has like a plan for the day that he wants to do. He
Yeah.
would come to me and like it's a lot like really structured in terms of like how the day is gonna go. Whereas
Mhm.
like with me as like I'm the one guy, it's more like kind of like okay, we get on, we kind of do more like open discussion, trying to figure out like what do we want to do, like what do people like to do. I
Yeah.
guess that kind of comes down to like new team elements,
Mhm.
less than unsigned. But again,
Yeah,
I think it
exactly.
comes down to the structure and the support system, right? It's like it's not there, so
Yeah. Yeah,
you
I
just kind
know.
of do everything organically.
Yeah, and I think I definitely can relate to, if I'm an IGL, even if I have a bunch of coaches watching a game, I'm still gonna watch it
Mhm.
and think about it and do all
Yeah,
that no matter what. And I think it's good. It helps you IGL better in the server if you're the one that kind of
yeah,
or part of the one of the part of the group that was doing
yeah,
that. But it is hard when I think as a IGL on a newer team, if you don't have the staff, like you're the one that has to do it, and
yeah,
nobody's like, yeah, and it's either practice is unstructured or you're the one that makes it structured. It's definitely a common like cultural expectation in the scene that like the IGL on a newer or
yeah.
unsigned team
Does
should be the guy that makes
Yep,
everyone get on and do the VOD review and know what to
yep,
work on for the day. And it's like,
yep.
and is the captain. It's like if you're the IGL, you also get the other four like leadership
Yep,
jobs, and it's
yep.
just
Which I mean, it's fine.
yeah.
I don't mind it. I think I guess the only thing that was like I could say that was like I didn't like with C9 was like we had like 100 staff people watching every scrim, every like every practice. It kind of feels like it's like weird. It feels weird because it's something I'd never been a part of before. Every
Mhm.
other org I was on, like with Rogue, it was like you guys are the players. You do your thing. Like
Yeah.
you need anything from us, you let us know.
Yeah.
C9 was very much like corporate in that sense, where it was like, here's our manager. All right, manager, GM, coach. Everyone's like watching the game. Everyone's in Discord. We're all just like there recording it. It's like
Yeah, I know that
feels a little
experience for
feels a
sure.
little weird because it's like I mean there's certain things like not to say anyone would say anything like bad, but it's just more like there's certain things when you feel like you're at work, you're kind of like on your best behavior
Mhm.
always. You kind of doesn't you don't want to like have conversations that maybe you would like want to have if it was just like players to player, right? Like it's more because players are peers, right? So people are gonna act like accordingly to like, oh,
Yeah.
these are my peers. Like you're gonna have a different rapport than if you're like with your boss, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like it sets like this kind of like weird team dynamic where maybe things don't progress as naturally as it should because people kind of feel like they need to be like acting a specific way, whether or not that's true or not.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's an
Yeah, no,
aspect. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I think if you're, first it just takes getting used to as a player no matter what. But yeah, if you've got your coach and, if you have a manager that's very like boots on the ground, like spends a lot of time with your team,
yep,
my experience, you get used to that. Like there's just a discomfort as a player, but then you're like, okay, these people are chill. Like
yep,
it's like being chill with a
exactly.
teacher in a classroom. Like, okay, like you're kind of my boss, but like we're cool, like we're working together. But
Yep,
it can be strange if you have like a lot of auxiliary staff coming in that you don't feel close to, because it reminds me, I joke that I've had that experience a few times. It can feel like if you're in like a high school or college classroom, and that like how they like the principal or somebody will come in with the clipboard and like sit in the back, and they're like
oh
either
yeah,
taking notes on
yeah,
the teacher and stuff, and
yeah,
you just feel the whole atmosphere is like there's just like that person in a suit in the back, like what is
yeah,
happening? Yeah, that can be really weird when you're like
no,
in the
for
middle of
sure,
a scrim and you've like scrimmed games casually for like 10 years. It's like,
yeah,
oh, okay, like the guy
yeah.
that pays me is
Yeah,
watching
exactly.
me,
I mean,
like
everybody was cool, so it's not like it was like uncomfortable in that sense. Just kind of like still that air of like people I work for. It's not people I'm on a team with per se. It's just kind of exactly like you said.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it's I think IGLs just have to do so much coming up, and it's hard to grow as a player at the same time sometimes. And I think because there's an expectation for IGLs to do so many things outside of IGLing before you have the staff, you end up with most pro IGLs or like pro IGLs who had like extreme work ethic, which is what got them there. And it makes sense. It's a role that requires a lot of work ethic, but I definitely think there's probably people who would be very talented in it, but where the work ethic might not naturally be their strong point, and you probably could coach and groom them into being very good IGLs, but it's hard to ever come up through like the open kind of qualifiers and like unsigned system into that, because there aren't really teams where like you just get 5 dudes together and there's no coach or anyone, and they're all just mutually like, oh yeah, you can be the IGL, but I'll schedule scrims and be kind of like the captain, and like, oh, and you can kind of think about like how we do practice. Like I encourage teams. I actually think if they shared that stuff more, it would operate. Some teams might find better success. Some of them,
I agree.
Because like I am the type of person that doesn't mind just taking on a ton of tasks. Like I'm obsessed with work and like to do it, and you seem similar. But I think for a lot of people trying to IGL who, it's okay to not naturally have that. Like you could still be a really good IGL, but like I definitely think there's players coming up who could be great IGLs, but like don't have the personality type where they're willing to be like team dad and coach and all these and a leader and all these things. And it's
I think it just comes down to like the culture, right? Of people like you kind of those roles kind of just go hand in hand naturally.
Yeah.
Because really, when you think about it, most in-game leaders are like really vocal. They're really like they're more times than not they have like a bigger personality, right? Like they're not usually just kind of like they're quiet. Like the quiet guys are usually always the ones that are just like the headshot machines. Not always,
That's
but
true. Yeah.
but it's kind of like when you think about like I mean maybe it's stereotype, but that's kind of like it just ends up being hand in hand that like the in-game leader is also just the leader because they're the most vocal guys on the team, right? The ones that kind of just run the show.
Yeah,
But
that's very true. Yeah. No, and I think kind of balancing that is important. Like, are you somebody with strategic vision who has to learn to be a little bit more of a leader, or are you like a great leader who has to learn to have more vision? I definitely kind of had to learn to do some of the things a leader's supposed to do, and it was a weird process.
I mean, likewise, I that was a big thing. I mean, I'm still learning every day about being a better like leader of men, right? Like really being like a guy that people want to like feel inspired by. That's like something that like James really like pressed was like you could be the best color. Like he's like you're really smart. He's like you obviously know the game. He's like if you want to be the best version of like that, you want to also make people just believe. I mean, inherently, right? You want to make people believe, even if what I'm saying is the worst thing ever.
Yeah. People have to trust
You
you.
want people to feel inspired by what you have to say, right? So I think that's like another thing for like any person that wants to be an IGL is like learning how to articulate your thoughts and really just like having a way of talking to people will make in-game leading better for you because
Right.
people will be more inclined to want to listen to what you're saying, even if it's like the worst shit, like you call the worst strats. It's like if I feel like you're listening to me, I'm gonna want to listen to you, right? That's kind of just how it goes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to have player trust, right? Yeah, and I mean,
Of course.
and being confident in your ideas is a big part of leading, because if you don't come off that way, people inherently naturally won't want to trust you. It's definitely something that I hope, hopefully this is a resource that helps people over time. I hope there are more resources for up and coming IGLs on that kind of thing, because you do just kind of get thrown to the wolves with it sometimes, and it takes a while to learn. It's definitely a huge part of IGLing. I think it's a reason a lot of IGLs move to coaching too, is because the skill set has a lot of overlap for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, FaZe are absolutely dumpstering Envy right now.
Are they?
Yeah, on Icebox.
Oh man, yeah.
It's a rough one.
We gotta catch the rest of these games. I want to watch this and the 100 Thieves Sentinels. That's probably a good note on that to kind of call it here. Any final thoughts from you, Shinobi, on any shout outs?
No, I mean, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. We'll do it again soon.
Yeah, I mean, no shout outs, just to the fans. Thank you for the support. You can follow me on Twitter at shinobi_FPS if you're interested.
Right. We'll make sure to put it on there. Yeah, please
plug. But no, I mean, it was a lot of fun, Adam. Thank you for doing this. It was good.
Yeah, no, we'll have to do it again sometime. And yeah, thank you very much for coming on. Super smart, interesting player in IGL. I loved hearing your thoughts, and I'm hoping everyone else did. And I'm sure there's a lot of followers out there who are supporting you, and I'm excited to see what you pull off.
Cool.
All right. Take it easy, guys. We will see you next time, next Monday. Take it easy. Peace.